So I'm happy to connect with you because I mean, there's so many things I would love to talk with you about, and maybe well, actually, I'd love to later in this interview to sort of do a lightning round. This is your life, Dweezil Zappa, about just cool stuff that pops up from your life and career. But I want to start with the present because you've got so much going on right now. You're at your newish 6 years in the making ish studio right now. It's where you're zooming me from, and you got all kinds of cool stuff going on there. So why don't we start with that? Like you have like a tour, you have a studio, you're working all this cool stuff. You can start with what you want to start with.
Okay. Well, I was always planning to at some point build a studio of some sort. Um, it was just a question of when and how, and I got pushed further along down that road because I had to stop touring abruptly because of the whole lockdown thing, which affected any touring musician. And at that point, the studio had been in progress, but we just kind of pushed forward in other places in the studio that I hadn't really considered prior to that, which was it was originally going to be a place to just do rehearsals because I was touring annually. I did 14 years in a row,
Wow.
and it got locked down. So then when it did get locked down, I started doing some research on things that could maybe future proof the studio and give me more options to do things if I was going to be working in town. So it was then that I really took a deep dive into Atmos and all of the multi-channel stuff that was really being pushed. And it's the Wild West in a lot of ways. So I jumped into that early on and built a studio that would be very good for any kind of future project that was multi-channel. And so since building it, I've had a chance to work on some really cool things, including Deep Purple's Machine Head record, which I mixed in stereo and Atmos. And we've worked on the Jimi Hendrix record that came out not too long ago, which was the one of the main ones. Now I'm spacing on the name of it. But it's the one that has all along the Watchtower and
Mhm.
stuff on it. So um,
You got a lot going on.
yeah, a lot of things. So anyway, the studio
And
is
this
a
is called Hikari Studio, right? Am I pronouncing correct?
yeah. And what's funny is that in Japanese that means light, but in Finnish it kind of translates to someone that is a bit of a nerd. So it's like nerd light, which is perfect for a studio because the whole thing that happens in here is lots of nerdy things, detail oriented stuff that you have to deal with.
I'm not a nerd when it comes to stuff. I'm quite a Luddite, which is great to talk to someone who very clearly not only knows what they're doing, but is like creating it, as we speak. Are you involved? Like when I hear about Dolby and Atmos and stuff, I think I've interviewed Giles Martin, who, is George Martin's son, who's working on a lot of the Beatles reissues, the box sets that have come out over the past decade or so. Are you involved with any of the many Zappa reissues? Have you remixed or worked on your dad's
Oh,
stuff?
I should be, but somehow or another, there has not been anybody creating that opportunity. That's probably going to change at some point, but
Okay, cool.
there are, I think, some things at play that have always been there to make it so it wasn't an option.
Right.
But maybe a new era has dawned at this point.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how much you want to even go into that, but I'm under the impression that whatever kind of family drama was happening is kind of got resolved.
Well,
Um,
it's not necessarily a fully resolved thing, but it's in the background and in the past for the most part.
cool. Good to hear that. Good to hear that. So, yeah, tell me a little bit more about some of the other things you're working on. You mentioned Hendrix, and there's like a Hendrix tour
Yeah, that's
that you're part of.
after the tour that I'm doing of playing my dad's music, which is called Rock's Apostrophe, because we're playing songs from Roxy and Elsewhere and Apostrophe. Both albums are 50 years old this year,
Wow.
having both come out in 1974. So we're focusing most of the material from those records. I'm not playing the full albums, which I have done in the past. I've done tours where I played every song from the album in album sequence. But we're doing specialized versions of songs from both of those albums and some other things too. And it's a pretty new band. And so I have, it's a smaller band, it's a six-piece band, but there's two new players in it that do things that we haven't really had the ability to do before. So one of the things that's interesting is that probably half the show will have double drums, so two drummers, which
That's
is
very Adam and the Ants of you. I'm wearing an Adam Ant t-shirt today. And when I
yeah,
think double drummers, I think Adam and the Ants. I think Bow Wow Wow,
yeah, they had
that
stuff.
kind of vibe.
Yeah, but also my dad's record, Roxy and Elsewhere, he had two drummers on that tour. So it's a way to get some of this stuff to be era specific and do some cool textures. And there's always very complicated and sophisticated rhythms in my dad's music. So having two drum kits gets to highlight a lot of that in ways that we haven't been able to do in the past.
Awesome. So obviously, like I said, I've interviewed your sister Moon before. She has a book coming out that I'm incredibly excited to read. Are you ever going to do your own autobiography, or have you? If you have, I
No,
apologize. I
I
don't.
haven't. I just never really think about that stuff as being interesting. Like, I don't know who would ever want to read that, but so
I assure you, you've had an interesting life from what I know of it. I mean, I assure you there'd be people that would want to read that, but I respect if that's not where you want to focus.
yeah, I mean, probably not right now. But so you mentioned the Hendrix tour. They have the Experience Hendrix tour that's happening in October into November. My tour is August into the middle of September. So August 1st through September 11th, and then I'm on the Hendrix tour early October. So that's always fun because it's just a chance to play some Jimi Hendrix songs with a whole group of different musicians. They usually have 20 or 30 different guitar players on the tour. So it's a bit like summer camp for guitar players.
Interesting. That's pretty awesome. Who's on it on the tour besides yourself, obviously?
Kenny Wayne Shepherd, Zach Wild. There's a few other guys, Kingfish. I don't remember the whole list. It's an extensive list.
Basically amateurs, just
Yeah.
some
Oh,
schmucks.
Eric Johnson's on there too. So
All right. So people who clearly that's going to be quite the guitar fest. That's pretty awesome. So obviously, we've mentioned your dad and the work you do to keep his music alive, and perhaps some work you might be doing there at Hikari Studios, hopefully in the future, with all the, rollout of all the kind of, endless, it's seemingly endless vault of stuff that your dad was obviously very prolific. So I
yeah.
hope you don't mind me asking this, but when you and Moon were around, and I used to see you VJ on MTV and stuff, I'd love to ask you about that too. Because you were the ones that of the four siblings that seemed to be the most in the public eye when I was growing up, on MTV and stuff. The term Nepo baby didn't exist. And I've interviewed lots of second generation musicians about, kind of the weird position you're in when you are the children of famous people and you kind of go down a similar path. And it doesn't seem like, from what I could see, that it was ever challenging you. I don't remember any backlash you guys got like some other musical second generation people get. But was that ever something like, did you ever think, I'm just going to be like a dentist or a lawyer, I'm just going to do something else? Or was it like no choice, you had to do this?
No, I didn't really worry about any of that stuff anyway, because I just figured if whatever I did was going to stand on its own based on the effort and the work that I put into it. So I was okay with whatever that outcome would be. If I just said, okay, this is what I do, this is how I do it, like it or not, that's it, and that's how I've always been. So I'm not concerned. It's not as if having a famous last name in this area did a lot to open too many doors, because my dad was not really popular in the way traditional thoughts of rock stars are popular. He was kind of more a guy that uh, drew a bit of concern from people. You know,
Mm.
he had ideas that were bigger than most could handle, and so it wasn't. He always said the last name is what will get you in trouble. It's not going to be something that's going to help you.
It is
Yeah,
a good last name.
it is.
And a good first name, by the way. You are wearing that shirt, and I'm like, is Dweezil 2024 an option? Like, I'm just saying, like, you know, it's interesting timing. Your dad was obviously very political, but you never really have gotten very political with, or have you, with the music you've created?
No, I don't really care about that. You know, it's I don't think people, especially now, care what people in the public eye really think, and nor should they. It's really just make decisions about what makes your own life better. Follow what that moral compass is for yourself. I don't feel like um, seeing celebrities talk about politics is worth anything.
There's a
So,
lot of there's a lot of noise out there, so it kind of just adds to it. I respect those who do speak out, but obviously, you know, I don't, if I'm being honest, I don't think anyone votes because of what Tim McGraw or Ted Nugent or whoever. I don't think they vote but based on what a celebrity said.
no, they might feel good that they are aligned with people they like, which is normal because you would do that with your friend base or whatever. So, um, to that degree, I think people enjoy some of that compatibility. But, you know, my dad was very political, and his music was a playground for his ability to see what was happening in society and makes a mockery of it for the most part. But then also he had times where he was very visceral with the things that he was talking about, and they hold true. You look at songs like "Trouble Every Day." I mean, that could have been written, pulled from today's headlines, and that thing came out in 1967 or 68. I can't remember which year, but uh, point is, you said prescient before. He's always been kind of like the rock and roll Nostradamus, and just had this ability to see where society is going in many ways. And he's sounded the alarm for a lot of people. So when he talked about politics, I think it was very different than somebody that has like a borrowed opinion that they're just mouthing off. He really did get into the nitty gritty and follow and study and really pay attention to a lot of the details. So if someone was to quiz him on something, good luck trying to break his train of thought, because he really knew what he was talking about. Whereas other people that just kind of hear something they like and they talk about it a little bit, and then you ask them a deeper question and the interview's over, you know? So I think, again, you know, for me, I don't have a real motivation to be somebody that goes out there and just shares opinions for no reason. I think it's you know, if you really look at the things that he was really trying to wake people up about, it's the important stuff, really about just saying, hey, if you like having your freedom, there are people that are trying to do things to make it so that you no longer will have that in the future. So he was trying to really make sure people could pay attention to how things were being maneuvered, what's real, what's not. And there's kind of a lot more of that that has been, I think, opened up for a lot of people. There are many more people seeing what this industrial complex and the fake things that are out there and how it all has been that way for a long time. People are able to see through it. It's like seeing the strings for the puppets. You know, they're clearly there for a lot more people now. And he was talking about that stuff way back.
And the shirt just caught my eye, but it is interesting when we talk about how prescient he was and how um maybe people are catching up with him. What do you think he would think of, like, you know, you mentioned like, for instance, the pandemic, which kind of in a good way led to you doing Hikari Studios, but like the last 5 years or so, maybe more than that, the last 10 years or so of this world have been crazy.
Yeah, it's been crazy. He would have been sounding many of the alarm bells and giving some clarity to many situations, and doing it in a way where people could really understand it. He just cut right to it. There was no BS in what he was saying. So I think that there's it's too much to go into, and he clearly would have been, I think, an important figure in letting people know what to be on the lookout for. But ultimately, we are where we are, and people have to wake up and look at their surroundings and figure out what is going to be best for what they want for their lives and for their kids and stuff. And there's just so much stuff that's so out of control beyond what anybody could ever have imagined. Yet it's just kind of been back there as a grand master plan, that people have been working on, and they've been doing a good job of rolling out this garbage. But it would be nice if there were a few people that could be on duty looking out for everybody.
Absolutely. Was your father, you said he was kind of a straight shooter. Was he kind of like that as a parent? Like, I get the impression he probably didn't talk down to you kids in a like baby talkish kind of way. Like, what was he like when he was kind of educating you about the world and about music?
It was really more for me watching what he did and the way he did it. That was how I formed my opinion of the world and what things are important, how you interact with people. So it wasn't so much that we got I'm speaking just for myself. It
Mhm.
wasn't lectures or anything. I was fascinated by what he did. So I think we had a lot in common, and it was easy for us to get along and understand the things that were interesting in the world, and why creativity was just this open source of excitement and a purpose in life. I think he loved just being able to create something out of nothing, and that was something that he did daily for hours and hours. So he was um, not necessarily the guy that was going to sit down and tell you this is how it goes. It was, for me, easy to watch what he did and say, oh, I would like to follow that path in that way. Um, it's in some ways it's similar to how people deal with stuff where they have whatever their friend groups are, their peers. If they're inspired by something, they take a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and then they go in the direction that they go. But it just happened that I had a very good role model in what my dad was doing, and so I followed in many ways in my own life, musically and otherwise.
Did you spend a lot of time in his home studio?
Yeah, for sure.
Well, your home studio, the studio in your home.
Yeah, it was the Utility Muffin Research Kitchen, and I was in there as often as I could be in there, and paying attention to what he was doing and how he was doing it. So I really did learn a lot about recording, a lot about music, a lot about being a band leader, all kinds of things just from watching what he was doing and how he did it.
I mean, I'm wondering, is there a reason why you were the one that kind of like gravitated more towards that studio life and that musical life?
I don't know. I was always somebody that could envision something and just go after it and then do it. So, like, if I wanted to be good at something, I would spend the time to do it because I could see in my mind's eye, oh, I need to do these things because I could get from here to there. And then once I get from to that point, I can go to the next thing. So it was motivation, but it was self-induced motivation. And I could see that that's how it was done. My dad did it that way, and he he did a lot of stuff in a short amount of time. So you can only do that if you really are confident in knowing what you want to do and how to do it and know all the steps. He was more of an auteur in the way that he controlled the vision of everything, the writing of the music, the way it should sound, the way people should perform it, the visuals of whatever he was working on when he did those specials and the films and things. So he was very clear-minded about what he wanted to do and how to do it.
And obviously so were you, because when I've talked about how this was your destiny, this was always your path. You were like 12 when your first single came out, right? I mean, I've heard a little behind the scenes stories about it from our mutual friend, Frank Meyer, who may have sort of been a fly on the wall witness to it. I might be wrong, but he seems to have memories of it. But I'd love to hear about that, because you got to, you know, you got to study with the greats, not just obviously your father, but like Eddie Van Halen. I know that you've told this story probably many times, but not to me. I'd love to hear it.
Sure. Well, um, the thing about Edward Van Halen is I started getting interested in the guitar. I always loved my dad's guitar playing, but I knew that you had to know a lot of stuff to be able to play the music that he wrote or play in the style that he was playing. And it wasn't something that I could see specifically in my mind when I was 12, because it just seemed like, oh, there's so many layers to this. I got to find the one thing that I can drill down on that can give me the focus to get to the place that I need to get to. And the music of Van Halen and the guitar playing of Randy Rhoads when he was playing with Ozzy Osbourne, those things were probably the most popular things on LA radio when I was 12. So 1982, um, you're hearing a lot of Van Halen, you're hearing a lot of Ozzy Osbourne with Randy Rhoads. And that kind of guitar playing was laser focused to just jump out of the speakers. And I loved the sound of it. And I could hear, okay, I want to do something like that. And I figured out how to make similar kind of sounds. And I was really getting into that. And I was playing 8 or 10 or 12 hours a day just because I was so into learning the techniques and trying to figure out how this stuff was being done. But out of the blue, we had a phone call at the house one day, and it was a guy purporting to be Edward Van Halen. And we used to have phones back in the day where you'd have a phone that was on the wall and it could have multiple lines. So, and somebody could go into another room and pick up the same line and listen in. And so this guy had called and said he was Edward Van Halen. And my mom was saying, this guy's saying he's Edward Van Halen. So, of course, my ears perk up and she's like, get on the other line, see if you can tell it's him. Now, there's no way I could have known if it was him or not, because back then you never heard musicians talk unless you heard them on the radio or maybe on some kind of TV interview, but it was very rare. You only really saw them in pictures, in magazines, or on album covers and stuff. So the only frame of reference for his voice was the voice that was heard on Unchained, where you hear, come on, Dave, give us a break. So I was like, I don't know if that's the producer or if that's Edward. I have no idea who that is. So I'm just listening for a few minutes, and it sounds like, well, this could be legitimate, but you never know. It could just be some crazy person pretending to be somebody. But my dad ends up getting on the phone, and probably 15 minutes later, Edward shows up at the house. So my dad invited him over, and he walks up the stairs with a guitar that's not in a case. He's just holding it. It's this purple guitar with a piece of black tape over the headstock, so you couldn't see the name of the guitar. And he's walking up these stairs. And to me, I always tell this part of it is, as I was watching him walk up, he might as well have been a superhero. I mean, it was like backlit with a smoke machine and the whole thing. He was wearing the jumpsuit from Women and Children First, and he had the Van Halen necklace on. So, it's like, yeah, for sure, that's Edward Van Halen. And anyway, he ends up coming in the house, and within seconds of him walking into the studio and plugging in a guitar, I was asking him to play Mean Street and Eruption and all these different things so I could see up close how he did it. And that's burned into my mind. But over a period of years, I got to talk to him and play with him and really sort of discuss guitar in a lot of different ways. But he did end up producing the first thing that I ever did, which was called My Mother's a Space Cadet. He and Don Landy, who did the original Van Halen records, was the engineer. And they ended up producing the record. And for the longest time, I had no idea how that even happened. In fact, I don't really know how he was asked to do it by my dad or how it even came up. But it was just one of those things where at some point my dad had said, "Hey, do you want to record a couple songs? Edward and Don are going to produce it." And I was like, "Of course," So, and my friends that were in my little teenage band at the time, we were all just blown away that this was even an experience that we could have.
Wow.
So it did alter my DNA for that rock vibe. Whatever guitar was before that, it was amped up 1,000,000%, having had that experience of getting to work with him and then continue over the years to be able to do things with him. I'll finish it up with saying that I did have a very unique set of circumstances where Edward came to one of my shows. We were opening for Jeff Beck at the Nokia Center back in around 2010. And he wanted to come see the show and he wanted to say hi to Jeff. So he ended up coming to the show during sound check. And then he was checking out the things that we were doing. And backstage afterwards, normally I would have gone to a show of his and talked to him afterwards backstage. But he was at my show saying, "I don't even know how you play that one song. Show me that one riff." And it was like a total role reversal. So it was like a very unique situation for me.
That's when you knew. I mean, you probably already knew you'd made it, but
It
long
was
ago.
really
But if you didn't already know, that was a clue.
Yeah, it was interesting to have that because up until that point, I was still always in the mindset of a teenage kid that was just really excited to be able to be up close with Edward Van Halen. So him asking me how to do this or play that part again, that was really fun and interesting.
That's amazing. So you said My Mother's a Space Cadet was 1982.
Yeah.
That's the same year that, if I'm not mistaken, The Valley Girl came out, right? I feel maybe that was 81, but it was around the same time, 81, 82.
Was roughly around the same time. Might have even been 83. I don't remember. We'd have to look it up.
So did My Mother's a Space Cadet come out? Did it get played on those radio stations like KNAC or KMET? Or I feels like that's the title alone makes it sound like K-Rock would have played it.
K-Rock was the one that played it. I don't even think KNAC existed yet.
Probably not, yeah.
But yeah, it might have been played once on KMET or KLOS, but I think Rodney Bingenheimer played it on
It sounds like a very Rodney specialty show,
yeah.
like Teenage Enema Nurses in Bondage. There were a lot of titles like that at the time. I actually am looking up Valley Girl to see when the song came out because I'm getting all my dates wrong.
Well, the thing about it is
82, or at least the album it was on came out in 82. So yeah, good year for Zappa sibling music.
Yes.
So seeing that those songs came out, roughly around the same time, I hope you don't mind me. Was there any, I don't want to use the word resentment, but was there any competitiveness between the fact that, sort of accidentally your sister had stumbled into having, for better or worse, what actually is the song that probably the average kind of lay person, not music geek, probably knows for Frank the most for? It was like his biggest chart hit. It was the song that was like on Solid Gold or whatever. Obviously real Frank Zappa fans don't think that was, his marquee song or whatever. But like, it's interesting timing. I guess I just wonder if there was any kind of competitiveness when this song kind of broke out.
No, I think it was just, hey, that's exciting that he's actually got a song on the radio, because it was unusual. He had
Yeah.
had other songs that were on the radio before, but the thing about my dad's music is the stuff that got on the radio is the least representative of the rest of his catalog. And so it's easy for people to get
Hmm.
the wrong impression if the only songs they have ever heard are the ones that got on the radio. So it was one of the things that I did when I started touring was to really not focus on any of those things for the most part. I wanted to focus on the things that I felt needed to be better understood or have more exposure. So it was really more about him as a guitarist, a composer, and really learning the tricky, most complicated, sophisticated things that he did.
Absolutely. But like I said, for better or worse, it was a hit. It was maybe a double-edged sword for both your father and your sister. But then MTV was just beginning to start. And I mentioned how you were a VJ, and I believe Moon might have been a guest VJ on MTV as well, if I'm remembering the fever dream of it.
Yeah,
What
it's
was,
because
sorry,
I didn't really do a lot of that. People thought I was on there a lot more than I was on. I only ever did about 12 weeks of stuff over a period of 2 years.
that's
Uh,
more than most people can say. I mean, it was my dream I wanted to be Martha Quinn so bad. So like in 12 weeks, I would have taken it. Like,
yeah, well, I had fun doing the stuff, but I remember there were things that you would have these introductions that you would have to do that were before videos, and then you'd have to back announce videos saying you just saw Lionel Richie dancing on the ceiling. And so sometimes I just wasn't a fan of some of these things that I was having to talk about, and I couldn't force myself to look as though I was. And I think that was an unusual thing for the time to have somebody that's a talking head on TV show some sort of visible look that maybe they were not satisfied with the material that was out there. So, um, there were other things too. I think there was a time where there was a 7 Up slogan that I used to make fun of after I had to back announce something like, this video has been brought to you by 7 Up. Feels so good coming down. And then I would say, from what? And they didn't like that.
no, go figure.
Yeah.
That's really fun. Didn't I apologize. I did say I wanted to do a lightning round of just stuff. So Google is my friend. Wikipedia might steer me wrong. Wikipedia might not be my friend, but your Wikipedia page is very interesting. That's why I was saying an autobiography from you is something I would absolutely read. Did you not get fired from MTV? Am I getting that information wrong, or is Wikipedia getting that information wrong?
I don't even remember how the whole thing went down. I never had a contract with them. I only did, a couple of weeks here or there. So it was never a formal job.
Okay.
So it was just like, hey, come on in and do a couple things. And I think after a certain period of time, um, there was stuff that was happening, like what I was just talking about, where I would make fun of a sponsor and they'd say, you can't do that. I'm like, well, why? And so it just didn't end up being a good match at that point.
And then if I have zero memory of this, but according to my research, you and Moon had a sitcom for a while, and that, according to this, Shirley from Laverne and Shirley, Cindy Williams was part of it. I have no memory of this sitcom at all, but I need to see if I could find it.
It was on CBS. It was called Normal Life. And the thing about that show was originally we sort of pitched it as Addams Family Ties because it was more like what you would see in the Addams Family, where what they did was weird to everybody else, but normal to them. And that's kind of how our upbringing was in our house.
Hmm.
So the show was originally pitched to CBS as a show going down that road. But then as it started to go into production, somebody at the network said, "Hey, I got a great idea. Let's make them really normal and then have wacky neighbors." And it suddenly became this show that was probably not even as good as Charles in Charge, which was not a good show. So,
Successful show though. It ran many seasons.
yeah, but we got stuck in this machine there where it wasn't what we had originally thought we were going to do. So we ended up doing, I think, 12 episodes of it or something. But um, it was one of those oddball experiences because there was a movie that Bobcat Goldthwait had made, which was called The Making of Bikini School 3. And there was a director character in this movie where he was really obnoxious and he was saying, "Working with Jessica is like working with wet clay. She just says, mold me." And it was this over the top character, and it was funny but also cringy because you're like, "Oh, this guy is terrible." But we were on set, and this guy who was the director for that week's episode went up to Moon and he's like, "Working with you, it's like you're wet clay. You just say, mold me." And we're like, "Holy shit, that's the guy that the character from the Bobcat Goldthwait thing was based on." So
Wow.
it was, one of those things.
I think your vision for what normal life was supposed to be would have been much more, well, much more interesting. But I think
That was the,
probably,
that was the hope at the time.
did you ever reconsider, maybe later as things became, we have streaming now, we have many other ways besides just three networks on television to do something like that? Has it ever been an idea you've thought of revisiting in some way?
No, not to do that. I've been doing some other stuff that has been kind of a little bit fun and entertaining for promoting the tour. I've been doing a countdown on Instagram and on my website where I've been making these short films and short videos. I started when it was like 110 days out, and now we're at, I think, 34 days until the first show. But there's a lot of different videos that I've made up until now, and some of them people have been enjoying and saying, "Oh, I'd love to watch a series about, and have you keep doing more of these kind of short films, skit things." So I don't know, maybe something like that will happen. But we did also start the process of doing a full um, episodic documentary that is showing the process of putting this tour together from the ground up, so people can really see what it takes to do it. And so that's something that will come out probably midway through the tour on my own website, or maybe at the end of the tour. Just depends on post-production stuff. But we have been filming stuff daily since deciding to do the tour.
Amazing. Well, you mentioned the words wet clay. You mentioned clay. So I'd be
Gumby.
remiss if, yeah, I got asked about the Gumby song. Again, something I don't remember. Like the internet is so great that I like started looking up just because I know you've done so many things. And I was like, I love Gumby. Like I have Gumby collectibles. I have like a Gumby shirt from Spencer Gifts, like a neon, like eight. I should have worn it today instead of the Adamant. Like I love Gumby, but I do not remember this song. It was called like I'm in Love with Gumby, which I am.
Yeah, well, I don't know that the record that it was on was ever a very popular record, but it was one of those um, multi-artist records where they just got different people to write and perform songs about Gumby. So somehow or another, I ended up doing one, and Moon sang it. And it was around the same time as that sitcom we were just talking about. So not too uh, distant apart from each other.
What a time to be alive. Was it around the time that Gumby was having kind of a resurgence because of Eddie Murphy on Saturday Night Live?
I think so. It may have been uh, trying to capitalize on that, but like on the back end of it.
I'm gonna look it up after the song because I always loved the music in Gumby, like the original show. You know, it was actually like very like kind of spacey, like Gumby. I
Yeah.
don't know, we're in space. Like it was very psychedelic.
Yeah, it was a bizarre show, but you know, that was the kind of stuff that we got to see as kids. And there was that other claymation stuff that was really we were so desperate for cartoons and things in the early mornings. And sometimes on the weekend you would see that Davy and Goliath thing, the whole
Hmm.
Christian cartoon thing.
I remember that.
And we didn't like the stories, but we just liked watching the stuff that, you know, the claymation stuff, because it was similar to those um Christmas specials, you know, like Rudolph and the Red-Nosed Reindeer and all that kind of
Hmm.
claymation stuff, which was fun to see as a kid.
So it's interesting to hear you talk about being a kid because, as you mentioned, you know, you did not have a normal life. That was the irony of the sitcom being called that. And when I interviewed your sister Moon about the anniversary of Valley Girl, she talked about, you know, going, I think it was to Oakwood School, and how like a lot of the Valley kids, you know, had this normal life that was very different from your upbringing and in your home life. And yeah, I just love to talk with you about that, about how, you know, it's both good and bad to not have, you know, you had a very interesting life that made you who you are. But when you look back and think about, you know, were you aware when you were growing up in the Zappa household that like most kids didn't have all this? They didn't have Eddie Van Halen coming over. They didn't have a studio in their house. You know, they didn't have a father like Frank. Did you think it was normal?
Well, yeah, because every family, whatever they experience in their house is normal to them. So it wasn't unusual, because the thing is, my dad didn't have a bunch of people parading in and out of the house. He was actually working. And if people were there, it was because they were working. He wasn't a
Mm.
super social guy. He didn't have a big circle of friends. So the the stuff that was going on at the house, I think the kids that came over and enjoyed coming over realized that there was a certain kind of freedom in terms of you could speak freely and say whatever you wanted, how you wanted, and you weren't going to get in trouble if you said something using a word that maybe somewhere else you wouldn't be able to use.
Mm.
Because my dad had a great philosophy, which was that words are just decoration, you know, and he also talked about music as a way to decorate time. So
Oh
if
wow.
you know, if you're talking about using words that want to get the point across, some get the point across better than others. So, you know, emphatic uses of words like fuck can do different things in different ways. And so I think kids that came over and visited and heard that you could say that kind of stuff, they thought, oh, wow, this is wild and crazy. But really, what's the big deal? You know? So it wasn't wild and crazy at the house. Like, I've never taken drugs. I've never been involved in anything that's got me in trouble with the law. I've just never been interested in any of that kind of stuff. So I've never been drunk. I've never smoked any cigarettes. Uh, so other people who had normal lives got all messed up and involved in all that kind of stuff. So go figure. I don't know. To me, it's really just what you do, what you focus on, the path that you want to put yourself on. And even people in the same household can have a vastly different experience growing up. So,
Yeah.
you know, whatever my sister talks about doesn't resonate with me because
Interesting.
I didn't have that experience at all.
Have you read her book? I haven't read it yet. I
No,
know it's, do you plan to, or would
I
you?
doubt it.
Interesting. Well, it is interesting how people can have different experiences, and I'm glad that, you know, obviously the experience you had led you to making all this amazing music and having your studio. I've kept you for so long. Are there any other random things on your Wikipedia page? I have a list. It's so long. You
Never look at that.
collaborate,
So I
huh?
don't, I
Well,
never look at the Wikipedia page.
I mean, like the Fat Boys covering a Bee Gees song with Donny Osmond, Pat Boone, like the list goes on. Is there one that stands up where you're like, okay, here's like a random story about something that only I could have ever done.
I don't know. I mean, all those things just seem like, oh yeah, this will be fun. I mean, the whole point of life, I think, is to have new and different experiences and follow your curiosity. And if you find that you like something, you do more of it. If you find you don't, you don't. So it's a very simple thing. I'm just more of a like I'm in the moment. I don't care about what's over here. I don't care about what's over here. This is the only place where you can make any decision that matters or will change something in real time. So uh, when I have experiences that are good, they will lead me to want to do something similar. But I don't like live in those memories or any of that stuff. It just doesn't I don't have space for it, I don't think.
You got a lot going on. So when you're doing this, we've already talked about some of the things you have going on. Is there anything else that you're focused on right now in the future and present that you want to talk about?
Well, really just the tour, it starts on August 1st and I have a ton of songs I have to learn and I'm still going to be doing that right up until the last few seconds before I hit the first, downbeat on at the first show. But I think ultimately, I just really like doing things that allow me to have a chance to be creative in music. There's different elements that I like about it. It's not really like I don't have a desire to be in front of people. That's not really a thing that motivates me. But I do like the camaraderie of playing with musicians and being able to play something that happens in a moment that is unique to that moment and maybe unique to that audience. And I think that's something that my dad also really liked was just that something could happen that only a certain amount of people saw and felt in that moment. And that's different than what might happen the next night or 2 weeks from now or whatever. So those little experiences in life can be life altering. There are things that people can relate to say, oh, I remember the very first time I heard that song or I saw that concert. And because of that, I became a musician or whatever. So I've had things like that, even at my own shows where I've brought kids up on stage that were in the audience where I could see like a kid that might be 5 years old or 8 years old who doesn't play an instrument that I know of, but we bring him on stage and I put a guitar on him and say, okay, let's make you play guitar. And then I find out 10 years later that that kid is now a musician. And it's moments like that that were similar to me, where I got to have that experience where Edward Van Halen came when I was 12 years old, and it altered my life. So whenever those little things can happen, I like to see if that would be something that would be, a chance to have that push forward in the same way.
Awesome. Well, it's been quite an amazing life, past, present, and future. So I want to thank you for taking so much time out of your busy schedule to chat with me. And it was lovely speaking with you.
Yeah, appreciate it. Thanks.